Welcome everybody. Today, well, I was going to take a tutorial, but because of some reason, the tutorial will take in the next available session. Instead, we will like to talk about the next part of the course, that is on the quasi-elastic neutron scattering. Yeah, we already did the inelastic neutron scattering, and let's do the quasi-elastic neutron scattering. Just to a brief recap, once again here also what we have is the incident and incident neutrons falling onto a sample, and we look at the energy transfer and the wave vector transfer, and there on the okay. So yeah, this we already did it last time. Essential difference here is that for the elastic scattering, we look at the energy changes near the zero energy transfer, and which comes from a variety of stochastic dynamics. So, for example, that is how the schematically the neutron spectrum plotted as a function of neutron energy transfer has various features. You have the elastic scattering broadened with a resolution function of the instrument. Then you have the quasi-elastic scattering, which is a Lorentzian function. As we will see, it's not a single Lorentzian function. It could be several Lorentzians or combinations or convolutions and so on. But all the same, there is a broad spectrum centered around the zero energy transfer, and that is what we call the quasi-elastic neutron scattering, coming from a variety of stochastic dynamics. And then, of course, we have all the inelastic scattering features which can occur at a, including even overlapping with the quasi-elastic part or outside. Okay. So just to get back the various energy scales that we have been interested in. So for diffusion, if T is the relaxation time, and the stochastic dynamics, the correlation decays as exponential minus T over T, then its Fourier transform gives us a Lorentzian function. This is a very simple schematic thing, assuming that there is a single exponential relaxation function. Then the half width at half maximum of the Lorentzian function is through a Fourier transform is related to h cross divided by T, half width at half energy scale. Okay, so what we see on the neutron energy scale would be h cross over T, and typically if the relaxation time is of the order of a picosecond, then the corresponding angular frequency is 1 terahertz, that is 10 to the power 12 hertz. Picosecond is 10 to the power minus 12 second. So this is 10 to the power plus 12 hertz. And the corresponding energy of the neutron, if you constant h cross, then this comes to be of around 0.66 milli-electron volt. Okay, it's a fairly small energy, and that is why you require a high-resolution instrument for quasi-elastic neutron scattering. Unlike for inelastic neutron scattering, where one deals with a very large range of neutron energies, like as much as 200, the resolutions may not be as good as this one. However, even for inelastic scattering, sometimes we need a very good resolution if we are interested in seeing, for example, the phonon lifetime or the phonon weights for any purpose. Okay. So typically the atomic jumps in solids, for example, when diffusion takes place, they occur at a time scale of f, which means the energy goes as inverse of the relaxation time. So if you do that, that is the typical range one encounters in real situations. Of course, it is temperature dependent and all that, and there is a variety of dynamics involved. On the other hand, if you have not just atomic jumps in a solid, but for example, relaxations involved in a large molecule like polymer, which are also of great interest in biological activities as well as in variety of chemical kinetics or catalytic behavior. The corresponding relaxation times are about a nanosecond or so on. In fact, you would know that relaxation times which are in excess of about 10 nanoseconds are probably more easily measured by resonance, NMR technique. Neutrons are for typically faster dynamics. Okay, so that will be at the boundary of or at the interface of what you can do with NMR. So neutron scattering, typically this is much faster. It's nanosecond to picosecond range, and that is where the neutrons would be more meaningful. Now we remember this is important in the context of quasi-elastic neutron scattering, that we have two kinds of scattering, the coherent scattering and the incoherent scattering. We already know that the coherent scattering is the average scattering length of a given atom averaged over various nuclear spin states or various isotopes present in the solid. So that is general average is what gives you the coherent scattering. It is the average scattering length that will give the amplitude which atoms, which is the neutron waves which are scattered from different atoms, they can interfere with each other. Incoherent scattering, on the other hand, is a random part of the scattering length, and so whatever scattering, whatever variation is. But why this is so important is that for an atom like hydrogen, the incoherent scattering is extremely large. Spin states, and which is in fact it is much less for the deuterium atom, which has got more nuclei in the nucleus. So with only one hydrogen, one proton in the nucleus, there are a good number of states available, and that is why you get a good incoherent scattering. But this is a boon, because hydrogen is a very important ingredient in all kinds of organic and chemicals, organic proteins and whatnot, and those molecules tend to have a very large stochastic dynamics, various variety of relaxation processes or reorientations, translations, or rotational diffusion, and so on. So that can be very conveniently studied using neutron scattering, neutron quasi-elastic scattering, and one doesn't really have to worry about all the collective dynamics which complicate analysis. It is much simpler to talk of a single particle and its stochastic dynamics, very easy to model and very easy to understand, compared to having to worry about the collective nature of the stochastic dynamics. Okay, having said that, let's so this we already said, the coherent scattering enables interference between the neutron waves that are coherently scattered by various atoms, and that gives information about the collective nature. Incoherent scattering, as we just said, would give you the single atom dynamics, and so, but even this is Q dependent, the wave vector dependent. Wave vector, as you know, comes from the interference. Wave vector transfer comes from the geometry of the diffusion process, and so that is what happens with the neutrons which are scattered from even from the same atom at different times and interfere. The neutrons scattered from the same atom at different times can interfere, and the different times there are changes because of the stochastic or stochastic nature of the dynamics. So this is what can be done. We'll anyway come to more details about it, and as I said, if there are questions or something not understood, You can always ask questions, and we can discuss this in more detail into the. Okay, so this is again a little bit of theory which I am repeating, is that one can talk of the correlation functions, the self-correlation function, probability of finding a given particle r at time t, assuming that given that the same particle was present at the origin at 0 time. So how the atom is progressing with time, its own self-correlation function is what the self-correlation function is, and its Fourier transform gives you the incoherent neutron scattering. The distinct part gives the collective dynamics. Right now, collective dynamics is also very important for stochastic dynamics. You can have a collective stochastic dynamics. For example, you can have correlated diffusion. You know, the atoms can be diffusing, the diffusion of neighboring atoms, for example, can be correlated. If one atom diffuses, then it motivates or somehow enables the diffusion of another atom. Or sometimes there is also the collective dynamics involved, in which diffusion of a given atom may be correlated with the orientation of the neighboring molecules. Okay, so there are correlations between the orientations of neighboring molecules with a given diffusion of a given particle, or so on. So that collective dynamics is also very important. That requires then a little bit more complex theoretical analysis, whereas looking at it as a single particle dynamics is much easier, and that is mostly followed. Okay, so this we have mentioned already. You can talk of the double Fourier transform, correlation functions, position time correlation functions, and that's what is essentially related to what you observe in neutron scattering. The double Fourier transform of the correlation function is the dynamical structure factor. Again, the incoherent part or the coherent part, and those are observable by Newton. Okay, these are just some numbers about what are, for example, the coherent cross sections or the scattering length measured in Fermi meter, that is 10 to minus 15 meters. Sigma, which is the cross section, is 4 pi times v square, and it's usually written in barn, which is 10 to the power minus 24 centimeters square. So the coherent scattering cross section of the hydrogen isotope is just this much, whereas the incoherent scattering cross section is almost 40 to 50 times larger. For deuterium, these numbers are comparable, and so this is what we were saying, that such an extremely large neutron scattering cross section for the hydrogen atom, particularly the incoherent scattering, is what enables studying single particle dynamics of hydrogen atoms. The hydrogen atoms may be part of a molecule, or even if you have a large molecule, you can, and there is some way you can make a molecule heterogeneous and the remaining be deuterium. So that means a partial deuteration of a large molecule. You can focus attention on specific atoms that are not deuterated, and so corresponding dynamics would be seen. So that's a very important technique used involving deuteration of samples. Of course, other atoms are there. We are often also interested in oxygen diffusion, or for example, lithium diffusion in lithium-ion batteries, or sodium diffusion in the new sodium-ion batteries. So there, the cross sections involve both coherent and incoherent scattering, and so one has to then effectively analyze the data, and of course the signal would be much weaker compared to what you do observe in hydrogen. So coming back to now the let's talk on the quasi-elastic neutron scattering. So what are the things that we are looking at? This is, for example, the translational and rotational diffusion. Okay, it could be individual atoms or could be molecules. Okay, for the atoms it would be only translations. but molecules rotational diffusion, or there will be internal relaxations of a variety or polymers in which there are various internal degrees of freedom may relax with time. And we often have the localized dynamics, means the localized relaxation of parts of a large molecule, a large polymer chain, or what have you, or it could simply be localized jump motion of atoms between two energetically equal sites. Okay, like hydrogen phosphate, you have hydrogen atoms have two different sites available, and there is a disorder between them. The hydrogen could be jumping from one side to other back and forth. So you have a localized dynamics. So there are a variety of localized dynamics possible. You can have a long-range translational diffusion or localized dynamics. So in neutron scattering, as we said, because we can look at both the energy transfer and wave vector transfer. So therefore, these are the Fourier time scales of the stochastic dynamics, and also the actual geometry or the pathways involved in the stochastic dynamics. So both are can be obtained. The typical range in which neutrons give good intensities are, as you already said, in the corresponding energies of thermal neutrons are such that we can measure time scales from a nanosecond to a picosecond, and similarly paths typically in the range of 1 to 10 angstrom are what can be easily measured. Okay, so this, if you see, this 2 pi by q will be the corresponding time scale, its corresponding length scale. So that's about it. I mean, you can work out this. And if you look at the temperature dependence of this corresponding so these quantities, you can directly look at the time scales, how the temperature, what is the temperature dependence of it, or the diffusion. If you define it, the temperature dependence of the diffusion coefficient can be actually measured, and one can get the activation energies involved in the stochastic processes. As we just said, the nuclear magnetic resonance is useful for slower dynamics, which is somewhat outside the range of the neutron scattering. However, as you know, there is it doesn't give you a direct geometrical information of the pathway dynamics, but however, you can get this information by some indirect means from a variety of other experiences or information available. Okay, the neutrons are able to give it directly, means you don't really have to depend on other models. Again, the data analysis is done using either geometrical models of the stochastic dynamics or molecular dynamic simulation. We will talk about. So now this is a spectrometer that has been existing at the Dhruva reactor at the Bhabha Atomic Research Center for last more than about 20 years. In fact, it's published by Dr. Mukhopadhyay and his colleagues in Nuclear Instrumentation and Methods in 2001. The instrument has been, and it's a very novel instrument. It's one thing, it is based on the air cushions. You can see these are various arms of the spectrometer, and the air cushions allow you to move the positions by hydraulic means. Okay. And the typical features of this is in a way like a different variety of not exactly a triple axis neutron spectrometer, but a spectrometer which is again based on crystals. So what you have here is a monochromator. It's a set of two monochromators. So instead of a single monochromator, these are neutrons coming from the reactor, and it falls on one monochromator, then it falls on another monochromator, which is essentially parallel to the first one, and the same material. Both are pyrolytic graphite 002 reflection, and the advantage here is that the outgoing beam is then simply parallel to the incident beam, and even if you change the monochromator angle, the position of the outgoing beam does not change. So, and it also, two monochromators allow you to also reduce the background, just like in Raman scattering, for example, and is also the resolution. So the background is lowered and the resolution is also improved. In fact, this also has the second of the double monochromator, that is this one, is curved, as you can see. It is so it is a focusing geometry which allows you the to focus the beam. A larger neutron beam is focused onto a smaller sample, and thereby you gain on intensity. There is certain angular resolution in the process, but that is not a major concern for, in this case, for quasi-elastic neutron scattering, because you are not really looking for a very high Q resolution, not a high wave vector resolution, and therefore you can afford to have an angular range which is somewhat larger here. There is also a filter here. This filter makes sure that these neutrons reflected from this monochromator are not transmitted, they are absorbed. So therefore, you get a relatively pure beam. In fact, why this is required is because typically quasi-elastic neutron scattering involves small energies, and for a given resolution, you know, delta E by E, if I need a very good delta E, a small e, so that for a given value of delta E by E, a smaller e means a smaller delta E. So because I need a very good resolution to look at the Lorentzian function, which is quite narrow, so these are very low energy neutrons. Okay, something like so these are low energy neutrons, and because of the very low energy neutrons, the second order of these low energy neutrons, which is just neutron energy, has a very strong component in the reactor, and so you need this filter. Okay, so so one has this, and given that, so these are about neutrons which are very low energy, cold neutrons, or 5 millielectron volts or so on. Then these neutrons fall onto a sample, and in a triple axis spectrometer, the energy analysis is again done. But here, the novelty is that the crystal is a very large crystal. Okay, this is such that actually it could have been even larger, but it was difficult to get a uniform, very large and at the same time very uniform crystal. But the good part is that the neutrons which are reflected from, for example, from this end of the analyzer or that end of the analyzer, have different Bragg angles, and then they are reflected onto a large detector which is position sensitive, and therefore you know a position sensitive detector is such that you know where the neutrons have hit. So if you get a neutron count and you also know the position, if it falls here, we know that it has come through a smaller Bragg angle than, for example, the neutrons that fall onto this position, which has a larger Bragg angle, and therefore there is a spectrum energies depending on where the neutron falls onto the detector. So without moving the analyzer for a fixed position, you can cover a range of the neutron energies, and therefore a large spectrum as a function of energy is measured on the detector position. Of course, you move the analyzer to get a different scattering angle. So you get a different scattering at the sample, so you rotate the whole thing away, and you get then different wave vectors and so on. Okay, so this particular spectrometer at the Dhruva reactor has a resolution which is 0.2 millielectron volt. Unlike on other triple axis spectrometers, this resolution is more like 10 times this number, 2 millielectron volts or so on. So this high resolution is available. The stochastic dynamics in the range of you can say 10 nanosecond to a picosecond or of that order, and the corresponding Q values. Of course, we must say that when the neutron energies are small, the corresponding wave vectors are also small. And so therefore these wave vectors are only 1 to 2 Angstrom inverse, unlike what you need for diffraction. For crystal structure analysis, you need larger values also, or other kinds of structures. So, but so this range is limited. We will see its repercussions as we move on. Of course, this is just one instrument here. There are other instruments which, for example, another one existed on a previous reactor, was based on a time of flight technique. So you had there was a monochromator, but the neutron beam was pulsed by a certain technique, and then the neutrons scattered from the position sample were analyzed using time of flight over a large bank of detectors, something like time of flight machine we had discussed in a previous lecture. At Dhruva itself, another time of flight machine is being built. As far as other large international facilities are concerned, okay, this kind of technique is normally not used. One major problem here is that you don't have, it's not easy to get a very large crystal which is also sufficiently homogeneous so that you don't have any corrections to be made from point to point. But on the other hand, the typical quasi-elastic neutron scattering spectrometers are based on the time of flight technique because it allows you to cover even a larger of wave vectors and energy scales, and often you can get a much better neutron energy resolution by using a monochromator or an analyzer with a more flexible resolution. Okay, so both at reactors as well as perishing neutron source, you will find very large time of flight machines which are devoted to quasi-elastic neutron scattering measurements. So now let's see what kind of, let's get into some more details about what we have. So as we said, there are dynamical structure factors are measured in that, and what we are interested in here are two parts. There's an elastic, because you see it's a energy spectrum that is centered around zero energy transfer, and therefore we have to be concerned about the elastic part of the scattering and the quasi. So this is a simple schematic picture. The elastic part, as you know, just by a Fourier relation, you will find that the delta function at omega equal to 0 is simply a Fourier transform of the time average structure. So the time average structure is what gives you the elastic scattering. It's proportional to what is the, or rather the wave vector dependence of the elastic part is related to the details of the time average structure. Okay, so the intensity of this part of the dynamical structure factor is what gives you the information about the geometry of the time average structure. Now, this is time average structure has a lot of meaning. Typical crystal structure, the time average structure is just your periodic structure that you're trying to find out. If it's not a crystal structure, then, or let's say an amorphous structure, then also you have a time average structure at ordinary times of the order of a few seconds to few days. The amorphous structure is more or less invariant. Even in on the other hand, if you have only a rotational motion, then also there is a time average, because the rotational motions or other localized motions, the atoms are more or less localized within certain part of the space, and therefore that localization gives the time average is localized within a definite part, a certain small region of the direct space, and its Fourier transform will give you the elastic scattering, and that will be the intensity. So in a localized motion, you see elastic part. Okay, localized either structure or even dynamical structure, as long as it is localized in time, localized as a function of time, it gives you elastic scattering. Then the stochastic dynamics, that is the correlation function that time, that has, as we said, certain relaxation times, and the Fourier transform of that is like a Lorentzian function as a function of the energy, and also the half width at half maximum of the Lorentzian function has information about the dynamics, about the pathways or the geometry or the spatial information is what you have here. So say that the scattering, we call it scattering law for sometimes, or this is nothing but the dynamical structure factor, and the dynamical structure factor has can be written as two separate components, the elastic part and the quasi-elastic part. And of course, both the terms are also convoluted by the instrumental resolution function. So what is the resolution of the instrument? As we said, whether it is 0.1 milli-electron volt or 10 or 20 microelectron volts or whatever it is. So that will give you an additional broadening. So you don't observe just delta function, but you observe if the instrument resolution function is a Gaussian function, then it will be the elastic part will be seen as a Gaussian function with the width of the Gaussian what the instrument resolution has, and the Lorentzian will also be broadened by the Gaussian, and therefore the spectrum is then actually fitted. You fit it with using the instrumental resolution and the delta function and the Lorentzian functions together to get these coefficients of these, which are okay. So the fit will give you the coefficient of the elastic scattering. It will give you the half width at half maximum of the Lorentzian function, and also it's the corresponding amplitude. And there could be several Lorentzian functions. Depends, I mean, on the kind of dynamics involved. Okay, so. So now again, there are issues and incoherent scattering. Okay, so that's the structure factor we wrote just in the previous projection. So as we said, this could involve a coherent scattering. So far, we have not said anything whether its scattering is coherent or incoherent, because that doesn't depend on nature of dynamics. It depends on it depends on the nature of dynamics, but is determined by the nature of atoms involved in the dynamics. So like hydrogen, you will largely see incoherent scattering, whereas if you have deuterium or oxygen or sodium or lithium, you will see a coherent scattering and perhaps also a little bit of incoherent scattering. Okay, so that's one part. If you have a single crystal, then you can get the direction dependence of the wave vector, and in fact, it's possible to get very detailed spatial information about the collective dynamics that is involved. It is not really useful for incoherent scattering, because incoherent scattering, you are not looking at collective dynamics, and therefore whether the crystal is a single crystal or not is of no consequence, because you are looking at only one atom at a time. Okay, with no reference to how the other atoms are arranged or how they are, what the dynamics is. But single crystals are important for if one is interested in dynamics, get a very detailed picture. In fact, long ago, means could be people were interested in ammonium chloride or ammonium halides, NH4Cl, for example, and there was a lot of interest in, from purely fundamental point of view, how the ammonium reorients as in the crystal. Now, because it has certain symmetry, in ammonium NH4 is a tetrahedron, and the tetrahedron could rotate. It can have a rotational jump, for example. So, of course, there is an average symmetry and average position of the hydrogen atoms in the crystal, but as a function of temperature, sometimes there is a disordered structure, or sometimes there are more than one possible orientations, and the molecule could rotate about one of the axes of the tetrahedron, or about could have a reorientation by 90 degrees or about 120 degrees, or and so on and so forth. So such detailed information was actually obtained using a single crystal of ND4Cl, deuterated crystal. Though one is getting the single particle dynamics only, but with a deuterated crystal, one could get the detailed geometry of the reorientation process and so on. We'll not go into that kind of detail. Nowadays, most of the scattering, as I said, heterogeneous samples, one is studying using the incoherent scattering of the hydrogen atom, even partially deuterating a sample so that you can selectively look at molecule. However, if you're interested in, as I said, diffusion of oxygen atoms in fuel cells, for example, or for lithium atoms or sodium atoms in a battery material, then that has both coherent and incoherent scattering, and needs that kind of analysis. So, okay, so that being the general term, for the often, so now let's move. If you use a polycrystalline sample, then, and suppose I'm looking at one particular mode of the dynamics, okay. As I said, there could be several different modes of dynamics, localized dynamics, or reorientations, or translational diffusion, and whatnot. So, for a given one, again, this would have again two components: the elastic scattering and the quasi-elastic scattering. And this kind of function is suitably normalized so that you have AQ and 1 minus AQ here. Total integration gives you just 1. So this is called elastic incoherent structure factor, because it's we are looking at the incoherent scattering, and this has all the geometrical information about how the localized dynamics takes place. Okay, so I mean, you're fine. I mean, you did the quasi-elastic neutron scattering, but then you find that in case of neutron scattering, you are particularly interested to learn about the nature of the dynamics in terms of its spatial or the geometrical aspect. So one looks at this elastic incoherent structure factor, and that one is able to then fit and so here one is possible to work out simple expressions. For example, if you have a jump rotation with just a two-fold rotation, then the corresponding elastic incoherent structure factor, which you can get actually by Fourier transform of the position correlation time, or the corresponding pair distribution function. So it is of this type, which is J0 is a spherical Bessel function of various orders, zeroth order in this case. And Q is a wave vector, R is a certain radius of the rotation. So you can see that is important. I mean, the Q will be inversely related to the radius of rotation, which is expected. And a two-fold rotation has a certain feature like this. A three-fold rotation, on the other hand, is a slightly more complex function, but again, very easily seen, but different. A six-fold rotation will be even different. If it's isotropic rotational diffusion, then that's the way it is. And so in fact, you can see that these three functions plotted as a function of q bar naturally have different features. So it could be like this way. Okay, so this a two-fold rotation would have this kind of shape, three-fold would have this kind of shape, six-fold would have this, and so on. So if you actually plot the experimental the fitted elastic invariant structure factor by looking at by proper fitting and looking at it, it's possible to identify what kind of jump rotational motion is involved. This is again a very simple way of looking at it. One can do a more complex analysis involving a combination of these in different parts of the large molecule. So eventually one has to fit. The main idea is that your data may not have a lot of detail, but if you have a good model, then it is possible to identify which kind of model is the best one, and then okay, one can interpret the results more effectively. So that was about like rotational diffusion. Now translational diffusion, on the other hand, is it can again have two various types, like in a liquid or a gas. Okay, you can think of a continuous diffusion, or you have, see, the diffusion is very different whether it's a solid, liquid, or gas. Okay, so but in a liquid is a certain kind, but in a solid, more often or most often, the diffusion is through jump motions, because atoms have definite sites, and there are certain nearest neighbor distances, and an atom cannot it is located because of the neighboring atoms, and even if it were to jump from one side to the next possible, so quite often the atom would be just vibrating around its equilibrium position, and if the structure allows, or if the temperature is large enough to overcome any energy barrier, then it would quite often jump from site to a next available vacant site, or if there is a collective dynamics in some way. So it is, there are, it is simplest to think in terms of the jump diffusion. The actual dynamics could be more complex, but this is an extremely good model to think of, and a very large amount of neutron data have been analyzed using these simple models. So there are two kinds of jump diffusion models often fitted. You have a fixed jump length of length L, and with a relaxation residence time T. So this is a time between two jumps. Okay, the residence time. The time taken in the jump process itself is much less than tau, and considered negligible. So the residence time is important. So you have a residence time and the jump length, and if you have that, then the half-weight at maximum has a certain relationship. It's a function of Q. So here now let me just say that for translational diffusion, because the atom is not localized in time, it's continuously going from from the origin, from any point, to continuously moving away, and therefore there is no localized dynamics, and therefore there is no elastic scattering. So what you have is a quasi-elastic scattering here. Of course, you have also inelastic scattering because of vibrations at times which are less than tau, for example. When the atom is still resident at where it is, then there can be vibrations that can give you inelastic scattering. But over longer times, you have a diffusion, and so the half-width at half maximum of the Lorentzian function has information about the jump dynamics, for example, the jump length. Instead of a fixed jump length, if it is the jump length itself has a Gaussian distribution, then instead of single L, you have a mean square jump length. And if you have that, then instead of a sine theta by theta kind of a variation, you have an exponentially decaying function. And so the gamma q is then given by such an expression. So these are, we'll just come to it. These are a little bit different expressions. So For example, the fixed jump length diffusion, it has got some oscillatory behavior because of this sine theta over theta kind of a function. So you have some oscillations in Q, and if it is a this doesn't have an oscillation. This is like just exponential so building up. So it goes and tends to such position. So this is a Gaussian jump distribution or a fixed jump length diffusion. If you have continuous diffusion, then as you know, this will then just continuously keep going. Okay. So if you have, as you said, if it's only translational diffusion, then you have only the Lorentzian function, this is normalized. The total intensity will, for example, obviously depend on the number of atoms translating. So what is the corresponding total scattering? So that's another information one could possibly get, but that we are more interested here to see the time scale and the spatial distribution, how the jumps are or how the dynamics takes place. So for a single relaxation process, so that is what we have for a translational motion. For a rotational motion, it is elastic scattering and quasi-elastic scattering. If you have simultaneous translation and rotational motions, then well, actually, if you have a number of different stochastic dynamics, then the scattering law coming from, or the dynamical structure factor coming from each of them would be convoluted. So that is the formal way of writing it. However, in practice, if the time scales involved in the different aspects are very different, then anyway, the convolution would be then more easily understood. It will you can get the corresponding informations separated out. But yes, so one needs to look at the convolution, and then that's how. Okay. Now, here's an example of. It's a very illustrative example, although it's somewhat old, but typical dynamics that is one of the early measurements done at the Dhruva reactor. And the interest was these are zeolite molecular solids. It's actually a cage-like structure, and in these structures you have a lot of windows through which smaller organic molecules could through. And now, depending on, and of course there are a variety of zeolites, so there is a distribution of what are the openings available, and according to that, it is important. So these are actually practically used in industry, and one is interested to see for a given molecule what kind of zeolite could be preferably used for so that those molecules could be filtered out or preferentially be transmitted through. So these molecules being small, and there are large cages involved here. So there are diffusion of translation and rotational diffusion taking place. And so there has been a lot of interest to study this diffusion of a variety of organic guest molecules in this which are, again, there is a large variety of zeolite hosts available. Now, because of the complexity of the dynamics, we have to study this, analyze it using the molecular dynamics simulation. Okay, detailed molecular dynamics simulations are often done. And here what one actually found is that if you do a molecular dynamics simulation, diffusion at 3 different time scales. Well, that is expected or can be understood because it depends a lot on the structure of this zeolite cages. For example, the molecules could be sticking around the walls of the cage, or it could be diffusing just inside it enters it, KH is fairly large, and so it may diffuse inside it, or it can diffuse, go from one end to the other end and continue. So there are a variety of time scales involved. At a very small time scale, it would be just sticking around the walls of the cage. At the next time scale, it could be diffusing inside the cage. At even the higher time scale, it could be just diffusing cage to another cage, and so on and so forth. Now, for all these different kinds of dynamics, if you analyze the corresponding half width at half maximum as a function of Q, then what one finds is there are actually three different Lorentzian functions with different weights, different amplitudes, and so that is one found that the dynamics could be another functions. Now, see, if you look at the three Lorentzian functions, and for example, this one has half width at half maximum, which is in the range of a millielectron volt. Okay, whereas the other two terms have this number is of the order of 0.1 millielectron volt, and the third one is even slower, and it has the resolution or the half width at half maximum in the range of microelectron volts or tens of microelectron volts. So now if you have a given instrument, then in a given instrument, because it has been optimized and designed for a specific resolution and specific energy range, you will not see the signature of all the three. Give you maybe some underlying signature, or in terms of the background or something, or the intensity around the elastic part. But the Lorentzian function would be visible. So it so happened that the neutron spectrum experiment done at the Dhruva reactor just gave numbers which fitted well with one of the time scales, which involves a diffusion inside a given cage. Okay, nicely fitted. Initially, we were worried that if different time scales and simply assumed a single Lorentzian from in the simulation, you know, combining the three, you will get some average number. It will not fit with the experiment. But a detailed analysis, once it was done, it was nice to see that. And of course, other time scales can be observed by other instruments. For example, this can be measured using an instrument with a much better resolution than what we have here at Dhruva. Then this could be measured using even a worse resolution machine. Okay. Then we also have another here. These molecules also have the rotational dynamics. So the rotations of the molecule were, in fact, the simulation showed that they're much faster than the translations. And so the corresponding time scale is such that okay, so that goes even beyond this this number, and also has elastic scattering coming in and so on. As you said, the rotation has that. So that was another Dhruva reactor, which is a triple axis neutron spectrometer. And as I said, the triple axis neutron spectrometer has typically energy resolution, which is a few millielectron volts, often used for inelastic neutron scattering. And using that, we could calculate the equivalent of a rotational diffusion coefficient, and that was again measured by experiment, and it turned out to be again in fairly good agreement with what the simulations showed. So this is just not a very complicated dynamics, but yet it has a several components, several parts, and several translational parts, and the rotational part, and so on. So with a combination of molecular dynamics and quasi-elastic neutron scattering, this was all studied. Okay, so now we have done the quasi-elastic neutron scattering mostly, and in the come to the okay, let me come to my talk proper.